Ready?
Set.
Go.
Mario Kart came into my head.
Here's why in the world. Anyway, here's the thing that has been on my mind,
Yeah.
and I thought we could talk about. We could jump right into it. So I read an article, and it's writing about young men who are searching for religion, who are in search of God, who are finding their way into faith, and that there's been this surprising spike that Orthodox churches are seeing. So not Catholic churches, but Eastern Orthodox. They're seeing this rise of young men seeking to convert to be Orthodox, and young men who have never had any religion before,
Mm-hmm.
from no religious affiliation to becoming Orthodox, or they belong to a Protestant church or something like that. And they're coming to the Orthodox Church.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really fascinating thing, and what these young men are reporting, and there's this noticeable statistical trend of this happening. What these young men are reporting is that they're looking for something that's authentic, that's masculine, and that actually demands something of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel that when they go to a divine liturgy, which is what the Orthodox would call their mass, right, that there is something different about it. And they're really fascinated by this. And so I'd read this article, and I had a conversation not too long ago with a young man who did not previously believe in God, but
Mm-hmm.
has come to faith, has been reading the Bible, is reading like every day. He's reading the Bible. He's
That's
devouring it.
awesome.
It's so good, right? He said, I'm believing in God, and I've gone to a couple of different churches. I went to a Catholic church. I went to a Protestant church. I went to an Orthodox church. He goes, I think I'm Greek Orthodox. Now he's in that place of trying to figure out what to do,
Yeah.
and he doesn't yet know theology enough to know that you can't just say that you're something and make it so.
But you believe in
Yeah,
thus it
exactly.
is so.
Right. You don't get to just like self-identify as Greek Orthodox. You have to
Right.
actually join the church, and like the
Right.
Greeks aren't going to look at you and go like, "Yeah, you're Greek Orthodox." No,
Yeah.
no. But if you haven't been baptized, you're not Greek Orthodox.
Right.
Anyway, all that is to say, I have a personal connection to somebody who is echoing exactly what I read in this article.
Wow.
And so that leads me to think there's a real world application for this. This isn't propaganda. This isn't something
Yeah.
that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
But it got me thinking a little bit about what we're doing as Catholics when we worship, when we
Mm-hmm.
pray. And when we talk about worship, we talk about prayer, we talk about mass and things like that all the
Mm-hmm.
time here.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we can look at a little bit more of what's really happening in the liturgy
Yeah.
and what this means. Because this idea, this trend that's happening, what they're really looking for is something solid,
Mm-hmm.
something that says this is what we do,
Yeah.
and we're not making it up on the fly. We're not trying to figure it out. This isn't about us
Right.
ultimately. And at the end of it, I think that's one of the most important elements of the liturgy. Now, that's liturgical worship in the Catholic Church, in the Orthodox Church. That it's not about us
Right.
is really the key.
Mm-hmm. Or like the Anglican Church and how they're changing things. Even like, did you hear that they're changing particular ways in which they are referring to God
No,
within,
I haven't heard that.
yeah, within their service? I think it come out a couple months ago.
Oh,
So now it's like even languages used during like their liturgy, they kind of wanted to.
interesting.
I think it had to do with some of the hymns. It was like now you're orienting it back to what people need to make it more
Yeah,
inclusive.
but it's not about us. And
Exactly.
I think that's
Yeah.
the appealing thing when you go to an Orthodox church is
Mm-hmm.
in in this context, like at when they are worshiping, when the liturgy is happening, the Orthodox Church doesn't really care about you.
Mm-mm.
And that I don't mean that as like they lack compassion for
Right.
you,
Right.
or they're not willing to include you. It's just
Right.
that this isn't the important thing.
Right.
The important thing is the act of worship.
Right. There was so I had a conversation with a family member over break, and there was a suggestion to make mass more appealing,
Mhm.
right? And I was like, well, that's not the point. Like it
Because mass isn't about us at the end of the
mass is
day,
not
right?
right. Mass is not about us, and it's something that I've just been thinking how if we get God wrong, we get ourselves wrong. So when you look at the mass and you recognize the Lord is asking me to worship him like this, he actually gives a way for like kind of a rule for it, to this is how you worship me. But it's though it's not for us, at the same time it's for us
Yeah.
because we are brought into deeper relationship with him. But so I'm
Well, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
On the tangent, we just interviewed a guy named Matthew Wiseman.
Okay.
Matthew Wiseman, who I
Was
was
he
really
wise?
actually very wise.
Very
I
wise.
was
Okay,
excited
good.
because it was our first episode. It was coming out right around Epiphany, and
Yeah.
we had interviewed a guy named
Oh,
Wiseman.
that's
I was like, "That's cool. That's
that's
really
really
good."
cool.
But Matthew Wiseman made this journey from he was raised in a Baptist home, and then they connected with the Jewish roots movement,
Mhm.
and then they went from the Jewish roots movement into Messianic Judaism, to
Mm.
Anglicanism, and then finally to Catholicism.
His personal experience
His
or the
personal
church?
experience, no, his
Okay.
personal
Okay,
experience. Like
wow.
this was the journey that he followed,
That's beautiful.
and it's a really powerful story because in the Hebrew roots movement, they were incorporating elements of the Israelite worship and the Old Covenant,
Yeah.
these certain structures and things. So how they dressed, how they ate, things like
Right.
that. So they're incorporating all this stuff, but they started to realize that when questions would come up, they would just have an argument about it,
Mm.
and there wasn't an answer, and there was no way to get a definitive answer. And he started more and more and more realizing that there was a need for an authoritative interpretation.
Mhm.
And so he knew that liturgy needed to be there. There needed to be ritual, because
Right.
that's what God has always prescribed.
Right.
From the very, very beginning,
He's
there's
always
always like a
prescribed
ritual.
ritual.
Do this thing.
Right.
Gather together, do this, say these words, do
Mhm.
this action. So he was always looking for liturgy. That's what led him to the Anglican Church.
Mhm.
But he was still longing for that authoritative interpretation of what was supposed to be done. And
Mhm.
that's what led him to Catholicism. And I thought that
Mhm.
was a really interesting thing. But this idea of like, we've got to worship, we have to do these things, and that it's not about us, it takes us outside of ourselves.
You know what's interesting with that too? It's also it doesn't depend on you to get it right. In such a way, like when you submit to the authority of the church and you are allowing the church to lead you, really to lead you through it. I've seen in different Christian spaces where they're trying to figure it out still. There's almost like this I guess it could be like this anxiety, like, okay, well, what does God want to do? And you're almost like this pressure to create something or recreate something to try to still figure God out. And what a relief to be a child
Hmm.
within the Catholic Church, and you're being parented. That's why it's Holy Mother Church, right? There's this relationship that's happening when you're at mass, where I mean, I am being brought deeper into relationship, but I'm being parented by the church. And how does that relationship with the church affect you in a personal way, but also in a spiritual way? Because
Yeah.
it's this reality, like, actually, if mass is a whole prayer to God the Father, well, again, like, that's my relationship. Like, I have a relationship with Holy Mother Church, and she guides me deeper into a deeper relationship with God the Father through the Son and empowered through the Holy Spirit. Like, that's so it's something that I've just been thinking about and praying about
Yeah.
this last month, and how beautiful it is that God in his wisdom still gives us a mother and a father, right? And it's about that relationship of, okay, can I be childlike and be taken care of?
Yeah.
Can I allow myself to be led? And so submission isn't necessarily, oh gosh, like, I have this like authoritative parental authority that is taking away all of my freedom. But the more that it's a surrender to this, to abandonment to God, to a more fulfilling life, a more free life, a more there's so much more grace to be
Yeah.
had. And for those without the relationship with God, that's where mass is going to feel very monotone, or the typical one, like it's boring. And but it's boring if you're not in relationship with God.
Well, I would say it's not just that it's boring if you're not in relationship with God. Mass is boring if it's trying to be all about like making you
Yes.
involved,
Yes.
because it gets at the missing piece is, why do we have to keep talking about me? I don't
Right.
want to talk about me.
No.
I want something else. So this is one of the interesting. I'm glad you're using the discussion of discussion of. I'm sorry,
Name.
words aren't working here. I'm glad you're phrasing it as in the context of that spiritual motherhood of the church,
Mhm.
and the idea that we are children.
Yeah.
Um, to be a child is not a negative in the
Right.
way that we're saying it here.
Right.
And I think that there was a confusion, especially with the council and after the Second Vatican Council, one of the phrases that you'd read a lot is that, well, we're adults, and so we're going to have an adult faith. We're going to treat people like adults.
Which council?
The Second Vatican
Sorry.
Council.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
we're
Okay.
gonna treat people like adults.
Oh,
We're not going to treat them as children.
okay.
And it was this idea of, we're going to respect that they're adults and that they're capable of these things. And so we're not going to have, we don't need mystery, we don't need symbolism. We can
Mm,
just have church and everything. And we are, because we're adults, we're going to have an adult faith.
interesting.
And the positive of that attitude
Hmm.
was to say, like, engage, be an adult,
Yeah.
be mature about what you're doing. Don't be superstitious. That's all very positive,
Yeah,
right?
it's very good.
The negative, though, was this forgetfulness of the human condition,
Hmm.
that as human beings, in our spirituality, we are sons and daughters of God.
Yeah.
And we never lose that identity as sons and daughters.
Yeah.
In fact, we need to return to that identity as sons
Right.
and daughters of God again and again. And that's
Right.
actually what the liturgy is meant to make us able to
Yes.
do.
Yeah.
As an adult, I am able to be reminded of my identity as a son, as a daughter, as a
Right.
child,
Right.
that even though I am an adult,
Yeah.
heck, even though I'm a priest,
Hmm.
I am still a child
Yeah.
also.
Exactly.
So here's what I think happened. Now, this is me speculating on these things, but this article,
Hmm.
if you read it, some of these guys talk about their grandparents went to church. And some of their grandparents were very devout Catholics or Protestants, some, whatever else.
Hmm.
But their grandparents were part of that generation that said, we're going to be adults about this.
Yeah.
And so the language that they passed on started to drop the idea of being a child, or started to look at anything that suggested that the people who were there to worship were not in charge or were not the adults.
Mm.
They looked at that askance, like, that's
Hmm.
terrible. We can
Hmm.
never have a place or a situation in which all of us are not fully aware of everything that's happening.
Yeah.
So they eliminated, especially in the Catholic Church,
Hmm.
like, we eliminated mystery.
Mm.
We eliminated all this. I've said this before.
Yeah.
Changing the Mass from Latin into the vernacular has its positives.
Yeah.
There's a beauty to being able to pray in your own language. That's the
Hmm.
most natural way to pray, right? Is in
Yeah.
your language. Whatever language you speak, that's the most natural way to pray. So that makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
But the downside was it eliminated a lot of mystery.
Yeah.
And the other part was, the presumption was that just because it's in the vernacular, everybody understands what's going on.
No.
And the problem is that there are, in fact, plenty of people who
Who
have no
don't.
idea what's happening during Mass.
Right.
But the thought, and this is because people thought, well, now that it's in the vernacular, we don't have to teach anybody what's going on during Mass.
Right.
And if we don't have to teach anybody what's going on during Mass because it's perfectly understandable, this idea that the Mass is understandable on its face comes
Yeah.
up. The Mass
It's
is not
not.
immediately understandable, which makes the Mass then boring.
Yeah.
It's just words that don't make any sense to me, so
Right.
it's boring.
And movements and
It's
yes.
not boring because of the language that it's being celebrated in,
No.
whether it's in English or in Latin. That's not what makes it boring. It's not boring because there's moving, sitting, standing, and kneeling.
Hmm.
It's not boring because there's singing or anything like that. It's boring because I have no idea what this means.
And that's the same with other spaces too. Like if I don't get something, I'm not going to pay attention. I'm going to be bored in it.
Yeah,
Right. And that's with it with let's say it's a class, for example.
but
But
well, exactly. If it's a class,
yeah.
students fall asleep.
Yeah.
Students stop paying attention,
Right.
even though the language that the professor is speaking is their language.
Right.
They understand all of those words,
Right.
but understanding the language is not the same thing as comprehending what the message is, or in
Right.
this case, comprehending the mystery.
Hmm.
And when we eliminate mystery, and mystery properly understood, we also started giving a poor definition to mystery.
So it's so I watched a podcast maybe like a year ago, and it was between a Greek Orthodox, a Protestant, and I think a Catholic. And what was interesting to hear from the Greek Orthodox, and I'm going to put it onto here for you to respond to, is that one of their critiques of the Catholic Church is that they diminished mystery.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to hear that. And so thus the attraction into the Greek Orthodox or the Orthodox Church is like there's a higher emphasis on mystery.
We started treating mystery like it was a bad thing. George Carlin did us no service here. Okay, George Carlin, the comedian.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, Chris knows.
Of course, Chris would know. I expect him to
You're
know.
too young to know George Carlin. I believe he was on Shining Time Station for a little while.
What is that? Is that a comedy show?
No, that was a PBS children's program with Thomas the Tank Engine.
Oh, okay, I do
You know,
remember
I
Thomas
think
Tank
I think he
Engine.
was one. I think Ringo Starr and George Carlin were
Okay.
both the conductor. I don't know for sure, but anyway, that's not important. Um, but George Carlin's thing about Catholicism, he would he would mock the word mystery.
Mm.
Say when you don't know what something is, just say it's a mystery. And that's not what we mean when we talk about
No,
mystery.
yeah,
Mystery is not a catch-all for I don't have an answer, so I'm not going to tell you something, or
right,
uh, I have come up to something like you've pointed out something that's illogical, so I'll call it a mystery and tell you that you have to believe it.
right,
No, the word mystery throughout the whole history of the church is meant to be an invitation to contemplate and to learn and to understand more deeply. It's also meant to be something that you realize I can understand up to a point,
right,
and as I understand more, I might be filled with a longing for more,
right,
but I'm not able to fully grasp. I'm not fully able to understand it. It's not mystery as well, we just don't know. And
right.
so there's no answer, but it's true. So you have to believe it.
So here's what's interesting. I want to know what your thoughts on this because there's another reason why he said Catholicism as
Well,
like
there's a connection to this with mystery to liturgy
to liturgy.
that is very, very important.
Okay.
So if the attitude supposedly was
Yeah.
that we could say this is a thing that I can't explain, it's a mystery, you just have to believe it.
Mm.
And then the liturgical attitude post Vatican II
Mhm.
was everybody should understand everything.
Mm.
There should be nothing that is inexplicable. Therefore, there should be nothing mysterious. Everything should be something that's immediately identifiable and understandable on its face.
That's what I was just going to say because that's what he said. He said in the Western church, like the Catholic Church, there was such an emphasis on like intellectually giving like we need to come up with a reason for everything so that you can like have these words, but how it took away from I guess to kind of well,
If you look at the old rite,
mhm.
uh, the
Oh,
the 1962 and before missals, right?
mhm.
And what you're going to see is that the certain practices, either something was said silently,
Mhm.
or this person was positioned here in this spot.
Mhm.
It all had a symbolic meaning.
Right.
And the symbolic meaning was actually explained.
Right.
It's just that if you never had the chance to learn it, if nobody explained it to you, you wouldn't know what was going on,
Mhm.
right? So you would need somebody to help to interpret that for you and to teach you it. That's
Mhm.
true. But the very action itself let you know that there was a mystery happening.
Mm.
And that mystery was indicated by candles. That mystery is indicated by incense, by the
Mhm.
music, and the way that there were these things happening. So you'd hear these things being chanted from the choir
Mhm.
loft. So the music is kind of flowing over you while you're looking at something that you can't fully see because there's incense blocking your vision.
Yeah.
uh, there's these movements and there's words being spoken, but those words are being spoken in silence. And all the while, I'm here and I've got this book that I can follow along with, or that I can pray with, or I've got my rosaries and
Mhm.
I can be praying. So there's all this action happening,
Yeah.
but it's happening in a mysterious way.
Yeah.
Now, the downside was that sometimes you weren't really paying attention to the mass itself. You're lost more in the book or
Yes.
lost more in your rosary.
Right.
And that can be bad in the sense that the liturgy is meant to bring the entire community assembled
Mhm.
together
Right.
to the altar. So if we start stripping away certain things and encourage people to be able to follow along more,
Mhm.
um, at the very least, everybody's trying to do the same thing. There's no longer simultaneous action. And this
Right.
is actually one of the big things that drives me nuts is that there's a tendency to think like, well, we have to wait until this ends before we can do this. Like one of the things that I talked to
Mm.
Deacon Don about when he first came, he would wait to get the blessing. So before the deacon proclaims the gospel,
Mhm.
he gets a blessing, and he was waiting until the lector had not only moved away from the ambo, but had bowed to the altar and gotten back to their seat before he would come and ask for the blessing. And
Oh,
for him, it was just, I wait for them to finish what they have to do, and then I do what I have to do.
interesting.
And I was like, Don, while they're moving, you should be in front of me asking for the blessing.
Right.
There's no reason for us to wait.
Right.
These are two things that we can do at the same time,
That's really cool.
right?
Yeah.
And it was a small practical thing, but
Mhm.
normally in the rite that we celebrate now, there isn't simultaneous
No,
action.
there
One
isn't.
thing happens, and then the next thing, and then the next thing.
Yeah.
Well, on the one hand, that does simplify things. It makes it a little bit easier to follow
It
what's happening.
does.
Like I know I went sequentially, I did these things.
Right.
But one thing that gets lost there is a little bit of that mystery.
Mm.
One thing that gets lost is the idea that there can be these things happening, and we can be fully aware of two things happening at once. Ask
Mhm.
any parent, they can be aware of two things happening at once. A parent can have a conversation with you and know exactly what their kid is doing 3 rooms down the hall, even though
Exactly.
they can't see them,
Yeah.
right? It is possible to do two things at once and maybe not do them super well,
Right.
or to be aware of two things happening and to
Yeah.
understand,
Yeah.
right? And it's also possible for me to do something, like in this case as a priest. It's
Mhm.
possible for me to do something at the altar that you are not doing
Right.
as a layperson,
Right.
and that what I am doing is fruitful for me and for you,
Yeah.
even though you are not participating directly in the thing that I'm doing.
Yeah. No, no, no. The one thing I'm thinking about is when you're preparing the altar
Mhm.
and how people kind of treat it as like a quick intermission.
Yeah.
They're like, "Hold
that's
up, break.
that,
We're at the halfway point."
that's when you send the kids to the bathroom. Yeah,
And
I know.
yeah,
I know what
so
happens.
Mom, I gotta go. I mean, I did that as a kid, so
Well,
I'm guilty of it too. But like as you're doing that, I apologize.
it's okay.
I'm
You're good.
still recovering from COVID, I guess.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm locked in a room with a COVID person. That's what's happening. I'm about to get the COVID.
No, I think it's like residual cough. It's really
It's
annoying.
crazy.
It's so annoying.
So
But
hang on, let me go into this for a
yeah.
second. Okay, so you have the Western Church that has since 1970, let's say, placed this emphasis on understanding,
Yes, that's what I was
right?
gonna say.
So
Yeah.
we've placed this emphasis on understanding. So let's get rid of some of the stuff that's just symbolic,
Yeah.
so that everything's more clear. Well, the problem is that now there's nothing symbolic.
Right.
And so people have either forgotten that there are supposed to be things that are they're meant to be a symbol,
Right.
um, or by dropping the symbols, we've actually kind of impoverished the imagination.
Yeah.
So there are things that symbolically are important that could actually be a really good point for meditation, for prayer, for catechesis, things that
Mhm.
help us to understand, oh, we do this because this symbolizes this. This
Mhm.
symbol reminds us of this thing, of this
Mhm.
aspect of our Lord's life, or of this
Mhm.
thing that God does. So what if we dove in a little bit more to that meditation?
Mhm.
The symbol is the starting point.
Mhm.
For example, in the old rite, whoever was doing the incense at a high mass would come out and would kneel, but to the right side of the altar.
Mm.
Well, the incense was offered at the right side of the altar in the temple.
Oh.
So the placement of the incense at the right side,
Oh,
the
wow.
vision of the heavenly liturgy is
Right.
incense at the right of the altar. To the
Right.
right of the Lamb of God is the incense.
Oh, wow.
So he would go to the right side of the altar to
Mhm.
incense the Blessed Sacrament.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense,
That makes a lot of
right?
sense.
It's just it's making the Bible come
A
alive
lie,
in
come
front of
alive.
you, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But you get rid of that. You stop having incense. You stop using this,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, well, that's just old fashioned. No, it's not. It's
Oh,
not that it's just old fashioned. It actually that was a symbol that served a purpose, and it
yeah.
served a beautiful purpose.
Yeah.
And that beautiful purpose is something that we can still work with, that we can still interact with. But when you drop it, when you get rid of it all, or when you just start ignoring it completely,
Mhm.
you end up missing a lot of really, really important things.
You
So
do.
similarly, then, like in the East, all right. Well, actually, let's stick to the West for a second.
Yeah.
The Latin Church, the Western Church.
Mhm.
Um, when the priest faced ad orientem
Mhm.
towards the east, you couldn't necessarily see what was happening on the altar,
Mm.
but you could still see that the priest was doing something.
Mhm.
You could see the priest. You could
Mhm.
see him active,
Yeah.
but you didn't hear him,
Mm.
because most of the prayers in the old rite are done inaudibly.
Yeah.
They're done in a whisper, right? So the priest would be whispering these things, and unfortunately, in the post Vatican II era, you'd hear this phrase a lot. The priest was just up there mumbling to himself. No, the priest is not
No,
mumbling to himself.
he's
The priest
not.
is speaking the words of the Mass to
R
God the Father.
Right.
He's speaking them
Exactly.
in a quiet voice
Yeah.
to draw you into the mystery, to
Right.
remind you that this is that moment when we step into something that's beyond ourselves.
That's my favorite part of mass, though. It's because while that's happening, as somebody who's in the congregation, you're just talking with God.
That's what's
Like,
supposed to
that's what's
happen.
supposed to happen. So it's
Yeah.
like you're like all of these things are happening at the same time. And it's just like I had this thought the other day. It's like how beautiful it is that we're each, I mean, God willing, all these different conversations are happening with God right here at this mass interiorly. and you're talking to God the Father about things that are in your heart, while at the same time we're all gathered here together, you know, in worship directed towards
Right.
God the Father. So like as this singular massive thing is happening, at the same time there's a multiplicity of all this beautiful interiority in all of everybody's life that's present at that mass.
Yeah.
So it's not just coming there and watching a presentation or just
Because
like you're
yeah,
you're
if you're
there.
just watching the presentation, what happens to you? You become passive.
Yes, very passive.
It becomes about I'm here to watch. I'm
Yeah,
here to make sure that I understand. I'm here to learn something,
right,
or I'm here to be entertained. Like
right.
worst case scenario, I'm here to be
Yes,
entertained.
right.
Whereas actually, what that silence is meant to do is draw you into prayer,
Yeah,
draw you into personal contemplation, draw you
mm,
actively out of yourself and
exactly.
into the worship of the whole community.
Right.
So, unfortunately, this phrase really became popular, that the priest turned his back on the people and
Yeah,
just mumbled to himself
that's so weird.
as though it was a way of excluding everybody.
Right.
Well, for
As if
over,
you were excluded
well,
from something that, like,
but also
God
as though for over 1,000 years, everybody just was like, well, I guess we're just excluded. No, that there's no way that for
it's
over a millennia,
yeah,
there all this stuff, like that's just not, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway,
yeah.
so this phrase though, it carried a lot of weight.
Mhm.
And so the idea that the priest would ever say anything silently or in a whisper. So even the secret prayers of the mass, there are still prayers in the mass that it says are said inaudibly.
Yeah.
A lot of priests started saying them out loud. They're
Mm.
not meant to be said out
Like which
loud.
ones?
Like when the priest mingles the water in the wine.
Yeah.
A lot of priests started, they don't do it as much anymore, but they
Yeah.
started just saying it out loud. It's
Interesting.
not supposed to be said out loud. Or there's the prayers offering the bread and the wine. Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation, for through your goodness we have this bread
Yes.
to offer you, right? Those can be said either silently or out loud.
Yeah.
If they're said out loud, there's a response.
Mhm.
But there's an important reason that those were said silently, or
Mhm.
that they were said in a whisper,
Mhm.
because that was also meant to be the moment when the people could offer their own prayer
Yeah.
personally,
Yeah, too.
individually,
Right.
right? Instead of like, I have to wait for the priest to finish his lines because I have lines after that.
Right.
Then it just becomes transactional.
Right.
It becomes so sequential that you're like, I have to do this, and then these people have to do this, then I have to do this.
Right.
Instead of like, this is my moment to engage
Yes.
and to actively be present here and to
Right.
be offering my own prayer.
Right.
So the more you strip away symbolic things or mysterious things,
Mhm.
actually, the more you weaken the act of worship itself.
Yeah.
So what happens is like what used to be the priest whispering, speaking silently, the incense, the music, the chant, all these things happening that were meant to visually draw you in. And
Mhm.
this is how the church in the West operated.
Mhm.
That there was like, you saw, but you didn't hear.
Mm.
And so it's this reminder that we are able to see only so far.
Right.
And there is still something that we don't know. So our worship was meant to remind us that we live in this world and we
Right.
can see the grandeur and the glory of God,
Yeah.
but we won't fully grasp it. There are some things that we still don't know or understand. Sometimes it's hard to find God present. We don't hear the voice of God speaking to us sometimes,
It's true.
just like I don't always hear the voice of the priest as he's at the altar.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that we were meant to see. And those are
Mhm.
the kinds of mysterious things that were meant to happen. If you
Right.
look at the calendar, I'm big on calendar stuff. You know this, right? Look, we're recording right after Epiphany. Yesterday, the front page of the
Yeah.
Connecticut Post showed the Bridgeport Police Department sending 3 police officers to
Oh,
Luis
for
Munoz
the
Marin School for the Three Kings Day celebration. The Bridgeport Public Schools and the
yeah.
Bridgeport Police Department know what day Epiphany is. It's January 6th. They know when the 3 Kings came,
They know.
right? And they celebrated accordingly. Look,
Yeah.
the Bridgeport Public Schools can't get anything right,
Oh, no.
but they figured out Epiphany.
I'm dead.
How is it that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops can't figure out when Epiphany is? Like,
What?
you explain that to me. I think the bishops think that the priests in their diocese would be upset if there was another holy day of obligation that they had to say more than one mass on.
Oh my
And I'm like,
gosh.
guys, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Morning mass, evening mass. That's it. Or morning and midday. That's it. It's not
It's
hard.
easy. Yeah.
We can do this. We are all fully capable of this.
Yeah.
It's really not that difficult. Like,
Kind of do it every day.
come on. And if I don't think there's that many priests out there who would object on the grounds that this would mean that there'd be more
Right.
masses. They have to guys would be perfectly fine with it if we're celebrating correctly.
Yeah.
Anyway, but if you look at it, actually, the Epiphany on January 6th matters because from Christmas
Mhm.
through January 5th, you have 12 days.
Mhm.
The 12 days of Christmas remind you of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
That the 12 tribes of Israel are the way that
Mm.
God reveals himself to all the nations.
Mhm.
And then after that revelation to all the nations come to
Yeah.
meet Christ.
Right.
The 12 apostles
That's so
are
cool.
sent out to all the world,
Yeah.
baptizing in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So at the
Yeah.
conclusion of those 12 days from the arrival of Christ,
Is it going out?
now there's the going out.
Yeah.
Then, if you look, and this is an interesting one, the old calendar from January 6th until pre-Lent, Septuagesima,
Mhm.
the old calendar numbered the weeks as the first Sunday after Epiphany, the
Yes.
second Sunday after Epiphany. You know
Yeah.
who still does that?
Who?
The Episcopalians.
No.
Some Lutherans. They
Really?
use the Epiphany
As a
as their
bench?
time of reckoning.
Wow.
And that would lead you up to the Feast of the Presentation.
So it's funny. So I updated. So I subscribe to a liturgical calendar,
Mm-hmm.
so it shows up on my calendar because otherwise searching is too much. But I did a different one this year where actually it says first Sunday after Epiphany, and so anyways, it's online.
Yeah. So that
But
time after Epiphany, what
it's
it
a
does,
reference point.
it's a reference point. And so what
Yeah.
happens is you're actually referencing your time right now
Yeah.
in relationship to the Epiphany.
Yeah.
And so even if you're not paying much attention to the liturgical calendar, but like
Yeah.
you happen to glance at it and you go, oh, wait a second, it's this Sunday after Epiphany. I remember
Right.
Epiphany. Epiphany was about this light of Christ being manifested
Right.
to the nations. It's
Thus
about me going,
contemplation.
yeah,
Now you're contemplating on like what the actual invitation is of that
right.
season.
Now I'm like, it's the
Right.
27th week of ordinary time, which means what again? Because
Yeah.
ordinary time used to be, well, so you'd have this time, the time after Epiphany, which was
Mhm.
green. That was the liturgical color, and the time after Pentecost. That was the other season where you'd have
Yeah.
the Sundays after Pentecost. And so
Mm,
the Sundays after Pentecost took you right up to Advent.
that's
The
so
Sundays after
cool.
Pentecost being that reminder of this is
Wow.
the season of the church.
This
This is
is.
that time of evangelization. This is that time of going out.
Yeah.
Now we call it ordinary time.
That sounds like such a letdown now
So this
when
is
you
exactly it.
compare it.
You start to realize, wait,
Because then what is ordinary time? I was like, oh, I'm just like,
it's ordinary, it's normal, right? It's not,
wow.
that's not what it actually means.
No.
Ordinary, the word in that case is meant to indicate ordered. We have numbered this time. But when you've
Oh.
numbered the time only in reference to itself, instead of in reference to
To
this
the
thing,
to a
like
major
this
event that
event,
happened.
yeah.
Wow. Because that is what
So
that's
what
your why. That's what you're doing
exactly?
now.
So what we end up doing then is
Wow.
the calendar itself has lost this depth
Wow.
of meaning.
Yeah.
When you have these layers of meaning taken away. Now, it's just as easy as you have layers of meaning
Yeah.
to get so accustomed to the layers of meaning
Mhm.
that you forget all of them
It's true.
and that you don't even pay attention to them anymore. Well, this is just what we do.
Yeah.
And you forget why it's there. But if you're willing to engage with the mystery, if you're willing to contemplate the mystery, if you're willing to dive into it and to understand it, you start seeing that there's so much more, there's so much
Yeah.
depth. So in the East, this is like how the West operated, right?
Mhm.
In the East, the difference in liturgy is that um, the priest goes behind the iconostasis,
Yeah.
like this wall of icons, and he goes
Mhm.
behind there, and you can hear the things that he's saying. So the
Mm.
priest's words and the priest's prayers are heard in
Yeah.
the East, but the priest is not seen.
Wow.
So at the moment of the consecration, when the holy bread and or I don't remember how they phrase it exactly, but
Right.
they've got this the liturgy of the priest sanctified or whatever it is. They've got this whole liturgical
Mhm.
jargon that I don't know well enough, and I'm sorry for that. But that's all happening, but you don't see it.
Yeah.
Whereas in the West, the priest would elevate the host. The bell would ring as that indication. Look up.
Right.
Look and see. You're
Right.
looking at something that you don't understand.
Right.
Whereas in the East, it was listen.
Yeah.
One of the phrases before the gospel is read, the deacon chants, wisdom be attentive.
Mm.
Listen to this because
That's
you're about to
beautiful.
hear the gospel proclaimed to you.
Yeah.
So wisdom, be attentive, be attentive. It's this call to paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you're able to hear what's going on in the East, but you don't see it.
Right.
And so you're drawn into the mystery in a different way.
Right.
It's two sides of the same coin,
Yeah.
ultimately, right? If you're being drawn into this thing that you cannot see, that you cannot like fully understand, but you can at least listen to it. You can hear about it. That draws you in one direction.
Right.
Or to see something but not fully grasp it, not fully understand it, draws you
Right.
in another direction.
Right.
But both of those directions are really important. What's happened, though, is that the East didn't really change.
Mm.
The East still goes behind the icons.
Mm-hmm.
The East still cries out, wisdom, be attentive.
Yeah.
But in the West, a lot of what we've done is let's get rid of the things,
To appeal to.
not even to
Not
appeal,
appeal, just to.
just because we've decided that mystery doesn't matter.
That's so
So
interesting.
look at what happened to so many Catholic churches. They got destroyed.
Yeah.
Like
They
the
did.
architecture was destroyed.
Yeah.
Then if you look at a lot of churches that were built post-council,
Mm-hmm.
they were built without any real reference to the liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
Or what reference they had to the liturgy was a misguided understanding. So you'd see in a lot of churches that you'd have on one side was the pulpit, and then the altar in the center at exactly the same eye line and
Mm.
level. And then to the other side was the baptismal font. The
Mm.
tabernacle was in another room,
Oh, yeah.
because the idea was that baptism, which brings us into life in Christ and makes us all priests,
Yeah.
and the altar are connected, and they're connected with the word. So word,
Interesting.
altar, and baptism all need to be seen in the same line, which is, there's a truth to
There's
that.
a truth to that.
There is a
Yeah.
truth to that, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to see them all together. Where the Eucharist is doesn't really matter, because what matters is that the Eucharist is on the altar. It's actually a heresy against the Eucharist,
Wow.
right? Like, and it's unintentional. I don't think anybody was like formally heretical in that. Maybe
Right.
some people were formally heretical. But
Wow.
anyway, so you'd see these churches that were designed without any real
So I
reference to.
actually didn't know why he got, like, so often when you go to these churches from the 70s and the 60s, like, why was Jesus back there? But I never asked why.
Because the idea was that
I didn't.
the church itself is for the mass, and so this is where the community comes together.
Interesting.
It's not about Christ remaining present for us.
That's so, like,
And so
the opposite.
there was this attitude that you can't have both things in the same place.
So, like, these two things
So
can't
again,
be happening at the same time, which is what
exactly
we
that
were just
same
talking
idea
about.
of simultaneous
Yeah,
action, right?
right.
It was the same idea was, well, no, the focus on during Mass isn't on the tabernacle. The focus is on the altar.
As if it was distracting in some way, or
Right. And so it's true that the focus is on the altar. That's accurate.
it's true, but
During
it's
the Mass, the
incomplete.
focus. Exactly.
Yeah, it's not complete.
Exactly. Just because while the Mass is happening, we are focused at the altar, doesn't mean that we can't also be alert to and aware of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist in the tabernacle.
Right, exactly.
We can do both things, and we can do both things without taking away from one or the other.
Right.
But this attitude was, no, we have to keep these things separate. Or the attitude was, we're going to, and if you look at a lot of these churches, man, oh my goodness, the stuff that they were doing and like introducing, especially abstract art, they took away symbol. So things that you could see, and this is a symbol, and I understand what the symbol is, even if I don't fully grasp the mystery behind the symbol.
Right.
And they introduced other things that were symbols, like abstract art,
Mm-hmm.
and this abstract, super postmodern
It's
style
not
of art.
timeless, though.
Well, it's number one, it's not timeless.
It's not
Number two, it
timeless.
was often ugly and cheap. But number three, they would introduce
Always ugly and cheap. Not often, always ugly and cheap.
by introducing these symbols that weren't self-evident. Like
Yeah.
what this symbol is doesn't immediately call anything to mind. You've got this thing, and I need a docent to stand next to me and explain what this is supposed to be about, so that I took a tour of the cathedral in Oakland once, California.
Is this the glass one?
No, this is the one I can't repeat it on the podcast because it's too vulgar.
Oh,
but it was funny. It was funny. But we literally had to have a guide walk us around to explain the art.
No way.
And I'm looking at some of the things that this guide was pointing out, and I'm like, I would not have understood that at all.
Wow.
This just looks like a weird shape, and now you're explaining it to me this way.
Or like,
okay, I guess so.
The Beehive Cathedral in Burlington.
Yeah, well, that's actually a good example.
Oh, it's a perfect example.
No, but do you see the article that they're talking about tearing it down?
Oh, praise God!
Because it's got so many problems anyway. It's got like all these issues. So they're actually talking about getting rid of it.
Wow.
Because you can't walk by it and know this is a cathedral. It's so ugly.
It's so disgusting.
Right. So they built these buildings.
It looks so dystopian.
Well, one of the reasons that a lot of that super postmodern architecture hasn't survived, like to now, is that it functionally it might be like a cool thing to do. It's
Mm.
cool to build this structure, but it doesn't last. And functionally, it doesn't continue to function as it's supposed to. It actually ends up being like a lot of people have figured out it's super energy inefficient,
Oh,
or
yeah.
it lends itself to mold
That
problems and
makes
things like
sense.
that.
That
So
makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
they've gotten rid of a lot of this. But the idea was we're going to like use art. We're going to use these architectural styles, and there's a value to that. We've used architectural styles throughout the whole history of the church,
Mhm.
but there's also always been a sense of there are elements. Now you can use different styles. You can
Mhm.
use Art Deco. You could use this, whatever it is. Um, you can have certain styles, but the same things.
Yeah.
So like a door, a doorway can be in like one style or another.
Mhm.
You could have a Gothic style window. You
Yeah.
could have a neo Gothic window.
There was a church in Peru that I thought was so interesting when we went, and it was like there were no doors because it gets hot. So it was just like this open. It was beautiful. It was stunning. It was a little. I think it was one of their cathedrals, but I was like, oh wow, this is like it's just open, but it's looks like
It's still a church.
it's still a
Yeah.
church.
Well,
Yeah.
like our church is a colonial style church.
Yeah.
So our windows are colonial. We don't have stained glass.
Mhm.
It's colonial style. It's open. It's
Mhm.
very airy,
Yeah.
but it's still a church,
Yeah.
right? There's elements that are supposed to be there
Yeah.
because those elements, if you understand what the church building is for, those elements that are present support the worshiping community
Yeah.
as they worship.
Yeah.
But they're also the church is not only there for the liturgy. The church
Right.
also exists for devotion,
Yeah.
for people to come in and pray and find a sanctuary.
Mhm.
And so when you have a church that's properly designed, you're going to get those elements.
Yeah.
In the Eastern churches, in the Orthodox churches or the Byzantine rites of the Catholic Church, you're going to find a lot of the same elements
Mhm.
and done in this incredibly beautiful way.
Stunning. Yeah.
Icons and gold leaf and all this stuff.
Mhm.
It's meant to tell you that everything about this place is different than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
That we're not trying to use something from right now. We're
R
trying to actually indicate something otherworldly.
Other exactly.
And
Transcendent. Yeah.
when we forget that in our architectural styles, we're going to build this. Like I always think about, there's a church that was designed to look like a barn, and unfortunately ended up looking like a Pizza Hut.
No way.
So you know how you can tell when a building used to be a Pizza Hut.
Yes.
So
That's
this
so
church still looks like a Pizza Hut.
oh my gosh.
It was built to look like sort of a modern barn, a modern take on the barn.
So, like, 2010.
Oh no, this was done in the 70s.
Oh my
So it was this
gosh.
like modernist,
Oh,
postmodern kind of
yeah.
thing, but it ends up looking like a Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a terrible design choice. What that does is it eliminates the idea that this could be mysterious. The other thing is, like I said, mass in that church, and there is nothing practical there.
Yeah.
The sacristy is over here by the entrance, and then the altar is way over here.
Mm.
And so if anything needs to be brought from the sacristy, somebody has to walk through the entire church to get it there.
Yeah.
Um, they had entrances behind the altar, so you could walk into the church
Yeah.
from behind the altar. Even like actually, if you look at St. Augustine's Cathedral,
Mm.
so St. Augustine's is it's a perfectly traditional,
Mhm.
normal style church.
Yeah.
When it was renovated in the 70s, they took out the high altar, they took out the altar rail, they took out this beautiful stuff. I looked at pictures of Monsignor Esposito's ordination,
I should find this. I
um,
should look this up.
and it was so beautiful, such a
Oh,
gorgeous
wow.
church. And they just eliminated all of it, and they set up this island.
Yeah.
Like they took out a couple of pews and built this like island altar.
Yeah.
So when I was first in seminary, it was before Bishop Laurie had re-renovated the
Oh.
cathedral. And so you'd be serving at mass and the bishop's at the altar celebrating mass, and the side door, which you can still use the side
Mhm.
door and everything, somebody would walk in the side door and they're walking in and he's at the altar. The altar's here, but the side door was here. So they're walking in behind the bishop and then walking over to a pew so they can be in front of the altar.
Oh.
So it's this really weird, like,
Yeah.
this setup doesn't make any sense.
Right.
This just doesn't make any sense. And what happens then is it starts to say whatever it is that we're doing, like if the architecture doesn't support the worship, if it doesn't support the liturgy,
Mhm.
what starts to be the message is this isn't important. When you
Yeah.
eliminate mystery,
Yeah.
when you eliminate symbolic action, when you
Right.
eliminate symbols that are coherent, it starts to say this isn't important.
Right.
When you start using only postmodernist styles of
Mm.
art that need an explanation at all times,
Yeah.
it starts to say this is the kind of thing that only an elite few can possibly be part of. And
Right.
unless I'm an artist and I'm part of the art community,
Right.
then I don't belong here.
Yeah.
Well, guess what you're going to lose then? You're going to lose young men.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if everything is, it's all about like a big thing, participation. Like, let's all participate. And
Do you need a ribbon?
there's ribbons. Let's all look at each other. Like oh my goodness. I heard this once at a Catholic school. This drove me nuts. It was a Catholic high school for a mass. And the director of campus ministry before a mass said, so that there are no strangers among us, let us all turn and greet one another before we begin the mass.
I
And I'm like,
can't stand
well,
that.
I'm like, these kids all go to school together.
They know each
They're
other.
not strangers. What are you talking about?
Right.
They all know each other.
Yeah.
We don't need to say that. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's just not logical.
No.
Right? I appreciate the welcome of guests. I really do.
Right.
I appreciate the idea that everybody who walks into the church should feel that they belong here in this community. But
Right.
come on now. There's some stuff that we don't have to say.
Right.
It just isn't necessary. Anyway.
It's not.
But what happens is if you've got this lack of mystery or these things that are just, we're not paying attention to that. We're not doing that. We're going in our own direction with this. If everything has to be invented, there's no sense of, I know what I'm here for. I know what I'm about.
Right.
If every time I go to mass, it's a little bit different. This week, we're going to do this. This week, we're going to do this. We're going to have this group doing this. We're going to have this group doing this. If every week these things are shifting and changing all the time.
It just sounds, honestly, it just genuinely sounds exhausting. Because to have to kind of keep creating in such a way that it's like, so, like, again, I think it makes it seem like it's dependent on you when it's not.
Exactly.
And then, like, that's the freedom of the mass is I just get to come however I'm feeling, and I'm going to be carried through the mass.
Yeah. Now,
like,
we have to understand this in the right way.
Yes.
Right. I need to be carried because I, in my weakness, can't do everything myself.
Right.
I might have a job that demands a lot of me. I might have a job that demands very little of me. Right. I might be in a position where I need to make lots of decisions. I might be in a position where I need to make no decisions.
Yeah.
But when it comes to my worship of God, I am a son. I am a beloved child.
Yeah.
And so I need to be carried through the liturgy.
Yeah.
This worship is not up to me.
No.
And actually, in all the areas of my life,
it's like the one place of like rest. It's true rest.
Well, and it's the one place where the fact that I am not able isn't a mark against me.
No, it's not.
Everywhere else in my life, you know, if I've got a job and I'm not able to do something, I'm not able to accomplish a task,
right,
I'm going to get called in by my boss.
Yeah, the doing is connected to how worthy you are.
If I'm studying, if I'm in school and I'm struggling with a class, and I get a failing mark, right, then that's on me. If I am trying to be a good parent and my kids are acting up and I can't figure out how to control them or how to get them in the right place, that's on me.
Right.
But when I go to mass, if I don't understand, that's okay because the mass is there. The liturgy is there. The worshiping community is there to pick me up and carry me.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's okay for me to be incapable there.
Yes.
Now, sometimes the negative aspect of that is I don't want to have to think. So just do everything for me. Tell me what to do. And I again become passive.
Right.
So there's always going to be a tension between there
should be.
Exactly.
There should be. It's
exactly.
It's not a complete like, oh, you know, I'm hands off, like that's it, and become like avoidant and distant while you're in the mass. But that's the beauty of the mass, which probably leans into your point about the masculinity of the mass, right? There is this tension that you're holding, and it's an active, like you are being disciplined throughout it.
Yeah. But here's the thing about, and it's sort of ironic, right? In both the East and the West, what are you going to notice about that liturgy? The liturgy, for all like the masculinity of like, there's order to it. There's a structure. We're doing these things. This is what we do. Yeah. Regardless of how we might feel. We're doing this. This is not about making everybody feel good about themselves. That's why, like in the East especially, their Lord have mercy, like their Kyrie eleison, It's like, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy.
Oh.
Christ have mercy, Christ have mercy, Christ have mercy, Christ have
Oh.
mercy, like 5, 10 times, whatever. It's like this
Wow.
like ongoing
Yeah.
call for mercy.
Yeah.
There's multiple instances of that. There's all these like, this is not about making you feel good about yourself. This is about all of this other stuff. But for all of that, what are we wearing?
At mass?
Yeah. Like look at so there's all there's this masculinity to it of there's a
Oh.
structure, there's an order, and I'm like using stereotypical sort of language here on
Yes.
purpose,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But then what's the priest wearing? These vestments.
Oh, yeah, you're
And
right.
these vestments
Yeah.
are nuts. The vestments are not masculine garments.
No, no, no.
They're ceremonial
They're
garments,
ceremonial,
right?
yeah.
They are ceremonial, but
Yeah.
like there's lace,
Yeah.
at least in the Latin church. There's
Yes.
lace.
Yeah.
There's gold. There's
Yeah.
trimmings. There's these things.
You have both the masculine and the feminine.
If you want to have like a really weird experience, get a group of priests together and show them fabric for a vestment.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny to think about.
And you'll watch these guys get really excited talking about, I really like this design. This is a really beautiful embroidery.
That's so funny.
Yeah, they'll get really excited.
Wow.
Like doing this.
They're beauty at the same time.
Well, it's because
so it's
there
not
is
just
beauty,
right.
right?
Exactly.
But then take all that stuff away
It's beauty and
give
order.
guys polyester vestments.
It's mute. Yeah.
It's mute. It's not very nice.
No.
It doesn't speak to the heart.
Right.
Make the mass more about the personality of the priest. So
Right.
it's about
Right.
either just how he entertains during the mass, or it's
Mhm.
about how he preaches. So we've got to make sure that we've got a really entertaining preacher.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that the homily isn't important. I know. I
Mhm.
know the importance of the homily, and that it is important for a priest to be able to engage
Mhm.
with the mass and with the congregation.
Right.
That's true. But take away the idea that we are here for something that goes beyond just us.
Mhm.
Like those of us in these four walls, what we're doing here is not about us.
Right.
Take that away, and people start to drift.
Yeah.
Because this doesn't seem that important.
Right.
It doesn't seem like you guys really think this matters.
Right.
And so why would I go every Sunday if it's
Right.
always going to be about how nice it is to see our neighbor, and let's just shake hands with everybody,
Yeah.
and let's look at each other while we're
Right.
praying. If this isn't about accomplishing something greater, if there's nothing other than just this, if we're always going to be talking about the community, if we're always going to be talking about serving and doing these things, it's not that those are bad things to do.
But on its own, it's incomplete. Like if it's just simply relational, but then there's an order by which like that those relationships deepen.
Exactly.
And so, and the same thing too, you can't just have order and be like without a heart engaging.
Right. Order without heart becomes just rigidity for no reason.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of people can lean.
Right.
So like you still have to have like this. And so, oh man, I love mass so much. It makes you human. That is
Yeah.
like, that is such a, like your humanity is being formed in mass. And as your humanity is formed in mass, then so is this deepening of a relationship with God, because grace builds on nature. So much is happening within you, like physically, emotionally, and then also spiritually. And it's just how,
How beautiful, right?
it's just, it's
Paula's
great.
brain is exploding with Catholicism right now, ladies and gentlemen.
But it's just in awe. We should be in awe of it. Like the mass reminds us what it means to be human, because that's what Jesus came to do,
Right.
to restore our humanity. And we can't just be like, rigid people
but
who
maybe-
love these things, but
maybe that exactly is the point.
mm,
The mass, the liturgy,
yeah,
reminds us of what it is to be human
yeah,
in relationship to God.
yes, yeah,
We are living in a time when,
to be a child.
well, yeah, but we're living in
Yeah.
a time when we have, in so many ways, forgotten what it is to be human,
Yeah.
and most of all, what it means to be in relationship to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the reasons that the Orthodox are seeing these young men looking for liturgy
Mm-hmm.
is because they're looking for God.
Yeah.
They want to know what it means to be in relationship to God. And they're also in a world where their humanity has been so badly scarred.
That's a good point.
So many
Yeah.
young men have been hurt
By
by
this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're struggling.
Yeah.
And they don't know who they are or what they're
Right.
supposed to be.
Exactly.
And so they're looking for an answer.
Yeah.
And the Orthodox Church, with its liturgy, actually very much the way the Catholic Church could,
Yeah.
if we would just celebrate the liturgy the right way,
Right.
when we celebrate the liturgy, we are reminded of who we are as human beings. That's exactly the right word.
I mean,
Human beings in relationship
and
with
she-
God. But I
Yeah.
want to end on that note. I'm counting this as your last word because you're the one who said it. I just expanded on the thought to make sure that it was explicit.
Mhm.
But we have to end because we have a staff meeting.
We do.
So
Okay.
I'm going to let us stop. But that was Paula's thought, not mine. Paula had it. She gets credit for ending this episode. Way to go.
That's good.
You're so good.
Yeah.
More like the lab.